So
I'm
I am
working on it.
here to give you good news about climate change. You do not hear that very often, but the good news is that the battle is not yet lost, and there are hundreds of things we each can do in the climate fight. Many of the current headlines about global warming paint a dire picture, but imagine instead hearing something like world limits temperature increase to record low levels, or nature makes a comeback and starts to fight against climate change, signaling brighter days ahead for all of us. Wouldn't that make you feel less on edge about what the future holds for ourselves, our children, and our planet? We're hearing more and more often that climate change is our greatest challenge and that we need to focus on addressing it now. That is a lot to take in and process, especially with everything else that's happening in our world right now. But the wide-ranging impacts of a warming planet and the major changes we're told are needed to address this issue make it easy to think that the problem is insurmountable, that there's not much we as individuals can do. But I'm here to tell you that there's a lot we each can do, and I'll share 5 steps so you can get started in being a change agent and fighting climate change. Hi, I'm Lewis Belcher. I'm an attorney with a master's in environmental science and a love of nature and animals. I'm also an author and recently completed writing my first novel, which is a climate fiction entitled The Change Agents: Whispers in the Wind. For most of my career, I've focused on private legal practice, but the recent losses of loved ones inspired me to try to make a positive difference in the world, focusing on climate change in particular. So in addition to writing the novel, I started a Facebook group called The Change Agents. And we encourage people to find what they want to save from climate change and give tips on how to do it. We encourage and we send positive messages rather than the doom and gloom stories that are prevalent around this issue. The specter of climate change and the big picture ways we hear to reduce our carbon footprints can be intimidating. It's much easier to postpone action than make major lifestyle changes, some of which can be expensive, justifying it by thinking one household won't make or break whether the climate warms. I have to admit, I've used this reasoning myself. But when I started looking into what I could do to be more proactive in fighting climate change, I was interested in finding the easier things first so I could adjust more slowly. I admire folks who switch to electric cars, start riding public transportation exclusively, put in full solar systems and make other big changes. But I don't really like change, so I wasn't really drawn to that approach. And I imagine that I'm not alone. I found that there are actually many resources that discuss the lower hanging fruit to get us started as change agents fighting climate change. I also realized that the most important thing to do is to start, to do something rather than throw the towel in thinking it's too big of a problem and there's not much that I can do anyway. At least if we try, we have a chance to lessen the warming. Whereas if we don't do anything, we're sure to experience the dire consequences of a very different climate and world than we know today. So as we know, global warming is caused by increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And that carbon dioxide has increased mainly as a result of industrialization, particularly the use of fossil fuels. To decrease the warming, we need to decrease the amount of carbon dioxide in the air. And there are 2 ways to do this. 1, lower the emission of greenhouse gases, and 2, remove more carbon dioxide from the air. Many of you already are likely doing things that make a difference, such as recycling. Making new products from recycled ones uses much less energy than creating them from raw materials. And another way to help is to switch light bulbs to LED bulbs, which use less energy for the same amount of light as incandescents and fluorescents. That impact really adds up in more places that make the switch. And even though LED are more expensive, they last significantly longer. So it brings the relative cost down substantially. You can also make a difference by utilizing solar, wind, or water energy. Most utility companies will give you the option, or you can do it, you're approached separately by green power producers, and you can choose them as your producers with your regular utility supplier. You also can go so far as to install solar systems on your house or your business. And those will help power not only your home or company, but also your neighbors. There are tax credits that bring the cost down substantially. And you'll also save on the cost of your power because over time you'll be spending less by producing your own. Also, the price of solar panels is decreasing rapidly. I'm sure you've seen this in the news, which is a great development in this area. Additionally, using electric power rather than gas goes a long way in fighting climate change because it reduces carbon emissions, which is really one of the ultimate goals. From lawnmowers to appliances to cars, the electric options are expanding and they're often much easier to use than their gas-powered counterparts. Something else that lowers emissions is eating more plant-based foods. Plus, that improves our health. It takes much more energy to produce meat than vegetables. The animals we eat consume grains and plants. So there's an extra energy consuming step in the process than when we eat the vegetables and grains ourselves. You can start by eating meatless 1 day a week and otherwise reducing the portions of the meat that you do eat. You may be surprised how easy of a transition it is and how much you enjoy eating healthier. And while we're on the topic of plants, trees are a powerful weapon in the climate fight because they absorb carbon dioxide from the air. Planting trees and keeping the trees that we already have are great ways to have a positive impact. The last step I wanted to mention today is to let your friends and family know what you're doing to fight climate change. Peer pressure and leading by example are powerful ways to motivate other people to do the same. Imagine if you can just double your impact if only one other person sees you doing something to fight climate change and they start doing it themselves. And then if one person sees them and down the line, it has a snowball effect. The more people who are inspired by you, directly or indirectly, the more impact your actions will have. You'll likely find it's a positive feedback loop, and the more you do, the more you want to do. Once you get comfortable with the actions you started with, you realize it wasn't as hard as you thought it may be. Plus, you feel good about helping in the fight. And you'll want to do more and implement some of the many other ways that lessen global warming. As with anything, starting can be the hardest part. We learned in physics that objects at rest tend to stay at rest, objects in motion tend to stay in motion. So let's put ourselves in motion to fight climate change by choosing the ways that work for us. And once we do so, let's stay in motion. It'll be much easier to stay in motion. We can all be change agents and make a difference against global warming. So let's get started. Thank you very much. My contact information, if you'd like to reach me, my email is EARL, S as in Sarah, L as in Lewis, B as in Belcher, and the number 2 at gmail.com. And you can find me on Facebook at the Sarah Lewis Belcher author page, as well as the Change Agents, which is a private group, and ask me to become part of the group, and I'll be happy to have you join us. So thank you.